made it, guys. We made it to the last session of the camp overall for the competitive camp, for the developmental camp. We made it to the last day. So, welcome to session number 4, how to close out a game. I appreciate you guys being here and making time to participate in the camp. A round of applause to you guys if you were able to make it to every single one of the sessions, or if you're able to go back and just take a look at these videos after the fact. So, kind of course, I want to go through the agenda for today. The plan is, of course, we're going to go through the presentation, but then at the end, depending on how many viewers we have, we're actually going to go through just casually playing an ARAM together. Going to kind of go through the concept of how to close out a game, and hopefully, if we have enough participants, ideally have some of you guys hop in the Discord server and actually talk about how to close out a game with me. Beyond that, I do have a special announcement for you guys at the end of the session to kind of talk about an upcoming event that we're going to be doing. So please do stay tuned until till the end so I can tell you guys about that and some of the cool stuff that we have planned coming up in the next couple of weeks. From there, I guess we can go ahead and just jump into the presentation itself. Of course, as I covered, the title is how to close out a game. So, always going to start with the recap, though, from last session. As we discussed, it's not all about the in-game elements whenever it comes to esports and competition. There's also a lot of external concepts that go along with it. Sleep, mental health, the physical fitness side of things, the individual player growth, the team environment, the analytics side of things, the nutrition side. So, a lot of different things that the players really need to consider whenever it comes to being, in an optimal state for competition in esports. It's that idea of holistic performance, right? Not fractured performance like we talked about in the last session. I'd really love to hear if you guys are in chat or have had the opportunity to incorporate some of these things. Maybe you were already doing them. Maybe you noticed a difference, or maybe you are considering incorporating them. I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your thoughts on that. If you feel like it was effective or helpful, or if you're excited to do something of that nature. Moving on from there, let's talk about how to close out a game. So the important thing is that you're strategizing from the beginning, right? Ultimately, you have to be considering these things and how to close out a game at the start of a game, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about. Is kind of what you should be thinking about as you go through the entire state of the game. So break it out into the various phases of play accordingly, right? So let's look at Champion Select. As you go through Champion Select, what are you trying to draft in order to do? What do you think that the enemy team is trying to draft in order to do? And then you look at the strengths and weaknesses throughout those different phases. So, early game, right? What position am I playing? You can look at this. I just went and grabbed a high challenger elo game or master and challenger elo game off of League of Legends yesterday, and this is the one that I came across. It has a couple of pro players, obviously, a couple of just challenger level players, and I just went and looked at everything, and I'll tell you what the outcome was, kind of as we go through things, and what the outcome should be. Let's go through it. And now, whenever I'm looking at this, I'm just gonna go from the perspective of if I was playing, right? So typically I'm the jungler. So if I'm playing from the perspective of, let's look at Jace's team. So I'm playing from the perspective of Graves, right? What am I gonna be playing against? So the first thing that you look at is, okay, I'm gonna be playing against Fiddlesticks. Is there a definitive winner in this matchup? If you go and you look at it from a statistical standpoint, I think that Graves has like a 49% win rate and Fiddlesticks has a 51% win rate. Now, that's relative to where the data was pulled from and a lot of other nuances that we could take into consideration. But overall, if we just kind of, take a step back and say that it's fairly even, depending on a bunch of variables that take place in the game, that it's not really one-sided over the other. It's not a complete counter composition or a counter matchup, rather, to what we're going to be playing. And so we can look to do a number of different things within the game. So what is going to be the most opportune lane for me to gank going into the game, right? What's going to be that's going to dictate kind of my pathing as I go into the game, so on and so forth. So if we kind of go and break it down across all of these different matchups, then we can kind of derive what's going to be the best plan of action. So Riven's a really difficult lane for me to be able to gank. As Graves, basically your CC to be able to try to minimize her ability to escape is going to be your smoke bomb. So you don't really have a lot to stop her. Jace can try and slow her a little bit, but again, it's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to catch her out. She has so much mobility with her Q, with her E. On top of that, she has Flash. She has her stun to mitigate your ability to chase her down. So while you can output a decent amount of damage between Jace and Graves, it's probably not going to be the optimal gank that you're going to want to look for in the early game. If you look at mid lane, so I know that in this image it looks like there was maybe some swapping around of roles in Champion Select, so it's not perfectly aligned, but it's going to be Vladimir versus Echo. Going to that matchup, again, Echo has a small amount of mobility with his E, so you could look to potentially gank it at level 1 or level 2 if he doesn't take his E. Level 1 would be possible because you're typically not going to take your E on Echo level 1, but you could look to do that extremely early. However, Vlad doesn't really offer much damage output early on, and so in an optimal scenario, you're going to have to look for Echo to be pushed up potentially to your tower so that you can typically flank behind him and get damage from that direction. As well as you're going to want to enable Vlad to try and chip him down and whittle him down a little bit in lane before you go and prioritize a gank. Otherwise, it's going to be highly unlikely that if you go and gank the Echo at full health, the Vladimir doesn't have Ignite early on, that you're going to be able to actually get that kill. So that takes us to bottom lane. Bottom lane, if you look at it, Aphelios is pretty immobile outside of his flash and outside of flash and the slight movement speed increase from heal. But Set does actually have some peel that he can put on that'll make it a little bit more difficult to actually catch him. However, it's not a substantial amount. So having said that, if you look at Lucian as well as Yuumi, Lucian has a decent amount of mobility to chase somebody down. So ultimately, it's probably going to be the best chance, especially since Yuumi can deal damage early. Lucian can chase people down, and then Graves can chase people down with his E and provide a slight slow for you guys to be able to kill Aphelios and or Set. So that's probably going to be the best way to go about it, is trying to look for a gank in the bot lane. Not only that, depending on the state and how early game it is, what that's ultimately going to set you guys up for is that, let's say that you do secure the gank in the bot lane, you are able to kill Aphelios or Set or both, or you're able to chunk them out and they have to go and recall. Well, then you have the advantage for Dragon, and as we've discussed in some of the previous sessions, having that objective control, especially with how Dragon is towards Elder Dragon later in the game now, that just sets you guys up to have a more successful early game. So it's a good opportunity to try to look to do that. Now, again, there's always so many nuances and things that can happen in League of Legends that can change that due to misplays on the opponent's side, or just random turn of events. You know, somebody tries to get over aggressive and die, things of that nature. But for the most part, if all things are held equal, that's probably going to be the best path for you to take. So there's going to be a little bit of explaining to do, as you can imagine, kind of going through these scenarios. So bear with me if it gets wordy and lengthy. But let's jump to the mid game and let's look at that. So let's consider which of these teams realistically has the stronger power spike in the mid game and why. So the answer, I'll pause right there, give you a second to think through it, and then I'll go ahead and move forward. The answer is going to be Jace's team. So if you look at it from the standpoint of the opposing team, Riven really needs time from an itemization standpoint to be able to get enough CDR to be able to fully optimize her kit. Like we've talked about in some of the previous discussions, as far as proper itemization and animation canceling and everything, it's going to take a little bit of time for Riven to quote come online. So you need to give her that time to be able to ramp up. Versus Jace is going to be able to build up and do that damage a little bit quicker than Riven will be able to, and be able to actually poke her out as well as utilize his kit. Fiddlesticks, it's going to be a very similar situation. So while his ult can be really strong at level 6, especially catching people out, ultimately the longer the game goes, the more damage that he's able to build. If you're speaking strictly about building towards, towards being a carry Fiddlesticks and doing damage, not building something like a tank Fiddlesticks or something of that nature. But he's going to need time to get those items. Not only that, whenever he's able to access his level 16 ultimate, substantially stronger from that standpoint as well. Similar with Echo in that right now he's actually played in more of a jungle role more consistently, but from a mid lane standpoint, he's going to look to try to build up his strength through itemization and try to assassinate, squishier champions on the other team. So pretty much the carries, and then utilize his ultimate to get out. The longer that the game goes, he'll be able to get more points in all of his abilities, things like his E that actually do damage to towers, and that's going to make him a nightmare both from an assassination threat as well as the opportunity to potentially split push, clear waves quicker, as well as do damage to towers. Aphelios, the damage that he's able to do, of course, obviously the more items that he gets, stronger he's going to be, but that's only compounded by the fact that he also is able to do AoE damage with his ultimate. So the later the game goes, the more damage he's going to be able to output, the more damage that he's going to be able to output simultaneously across the entirety of the team too, so it gets a lot harder to sustain. And then Set, if you look at Jace's team from the standpoint of the type of damage that they deal, one thing that you'll notice is that there's Jace, there's Lucian, and there's Graves. So you have 3 attack damage dealers. So Set's obviously the primary tank on the enemy team. The longer the game goes, the more armor items that he's going to be able to build. If the Vlad has a really bad early game, Set doesn't even have to worry about potentially building an EMR, or early to mid game rather. Set doesn't have to potentially worry about building an EMR, so he can just get bulkier and bulkier the longer the game goes on, and be able to tank the AD carries and Jace to be able to just sustain the damage and be able to hard engage. Outside of Fiddlestick's ultimate, Set is probably going to look to peel or hard engage, so he is going to be that resource for them. So again, the longer the game goes, the more likely he's going to be able to do that. So, one thing to consider is that, if there's a theoretical mid-game spike where the team is excuse me, theoretically in mid-game, if one team's fallen behind, it's going to take them longer to get caught up, right? So if your power spike is in the mid-game, but you're not doing well, it's going to take you longer to get that power spike. And again, if you're a late-game team and you've prevented that mid-game team from getting to that power spike, that means that you've likely also are going to reach your late game power spike more quickly, and the inverse can be said as well. So it's good to be mindful from that standpoint of where in relation to their actual power spike are they based on the gold that's been accrued. So if we jump into late game, it's kind of the same thought process, right? It's a matter of assessing all of these matchups again from the late game standpoint. Like we kind of touched on in the mid game, Riven's going to be able to be more of a late game champion. The majority of these champions are all going to be more of late game champions. So the longer that this game runs, the more likely it is for Riven's team rather, to actually close it out properly. And so Jace's team really has to look to be able to try and push and accelerate, be aggressive in the early to mid game, and try to close out the game as quickly as possible. Versus Riven's team wanting to stagnate and stall the game for as long as possible, to enable them to farm up, to enable them to get access to the optimization of their kits, so on and so forth. So uh, once once Riven does have full access to her kit, it's really going to be painful for Jace to try and contest her. Not only is she able to do a lot more damage, but she's able to kind of control and manipulate and kite the enemy team. She's able to hard engage, get on the back line, and ultimately it really doesn't matter if Jace has a ton of damage, and same thing for the other carries as well. If they're just crowd controlled the whole time through Riven, through Fiddlesticks, through potentially Echo, through Set, so on and so forth. And so they're able to try and get on that back line and actually shut them down. Um, Through that, what Jace is going to have to do theoretically is he's going to have to ultimately aim to try to stay in his range stance, because the closer that he gets, if he gets too close in melee, then of course it goes back to the crowd control. So ultimately, when it comes to the late game, Jace is going to have to try and poke somebody out, maybe try and get poke onto Echo, get poke onto Fiddlesticks or Aphelios to try to chunk them out to set his team up for potentially a numbers advantage, like a 5v4, or just be able to hard engage onto somebody and actually just kill them quickly. So if we move on to Graves and how he would have to operate in the late game, he's really going to be dependent on having a lot of success in the mid game. He's going to have a lot of kills. He's going to have gotten a lot of pressure to be able to carry that over into the late game to be effective. His damage output is substantially stronger in those phases of the game. So if he has had little to no success, he's likely going to struggle through the late game and not really be able to carry through that phase of the game. And again, as we kind of mentioned, the crowd control element of preventing, no matter how much damage you may deal, the crowd control element's going to just prevent you from being able to actually do anything. Now, if you look at Vladimir, that would be kind of the one exception to this, and that we talked about, earlier in kind of the laning phase for potentially ganking the Echo versus Vladimir lane. Vladimir actually does a substantial amount of damage in the late game. Not only that, he can sustain better depending on his build and his itemization. He's going to have access to all of his abilities to help him sustain better, as well as just be a nuisance to be able to try and actually kill. The longer the game goes, that'll be the one champion that ultimately is able to help them potentially get through the late game. But it's still going to be difficult considering the rest of the team and how the game may play out. So kind of jumping back to, or I guess continuing on. I was saying jumping back because Lucian's out of order in the actual character screen. But if we move on to the bot lane, if we look at Lucian, Lucian actually has a lot of dueling capability in the early to mid game because of his mobility and the way that his kit operates, and that's fantastic. However, it doesn't always carry over into the late game for him being able to do a substantial amount of damage relative to things like Aphelios, depending on how the lane plays out. But he has the option to be able to kite people much more easily in that mid to early game and win a little bit more skirmishes, and have that kind of utility. The great thing that he has going for him is that he did take cleanse. So if the game does go late enough, his damage output is going to be dictated by avoiding getting CC'd. So he has a Yuumi to help protect him, which is helpful with the heals and everything. But ultimately, he's going to have to absolutely look for the opportune moment to utilize Cleanse, hope that maybe the Riven and the Fiddlesticks overlap their crowd control abilities so that he can get out of two of them. Same thing if he's CC'd by Set, then that's another ability, so on and so forth. But that's going to be kind of the key component, is trying to utilize that Cleanse properly to help his team still win team fights. And then moving on to Yuumi. So this team doesn't really have a lot of hard engage. I know we kind of talked about fiddlesticks and set for the other team, but in the late game especially, this team doesn't have a lot of hard engage. So what's going to ultimately have to happen for them to potentially be able to win the late game is trying to get a good engage from Vladimir surprising them. And having a combination of something like Yumi on him, being able to utilize the Yumi ult to actually lock people down, or trying to bait the other team into an disadvantageous fight, and utilizing Yumi to counter engage with her ultimate. That's going to be kind of the key component, is her CC with her ultimate ability. She does have through her sustain, it really does help the team a decent amount, especially considering how many carries they have. However, the one thing with that is that if you're the enemy team, between Riven or Aphelios or Set, you're probably going to look to build something like an Executioner's Calling, because you have a Vladimir and a Yumi, and you're potentially going to have other champions that build out some lifesteal as well. So you really want to mitigate as much healing as possible and reduce it. Echo and Fiddlesticks can look to build things like a Morello Nomicon. So ultimately, in the mid to early game, the sustain is fantastic for them, but it's highly unlikely that a team at this level is going to allow them to have full sustainability as it goes into the late game. So part of her kit gets completely nullified. And then like we talked about, right? So consider how the early and the mid game played out. If this is a late game team, the Riven's team, and they got behind really early, well, then you're likely to be able to close it out as a stronger mid game team. And then again, of course, inversely, if the early to mid game broke even or went more in the favor of Riven's team, well, then they're likely going to reach their power spike more quickly, or they can look to skirmish a little bit and try to stall the game out till they can reach those power spikes. So ultimately, I told you guys that I would tell you kind of how the game went. And I was spectating somebody that was on my friends list for this, and they had just gotten into the game, and I went and I just took a screenshot of champion select, and I kind of started typing this up, and then I went and I looked at it after the fact, and it was actually Jace's team that ended up winning. I think it was about 19 minutes. That is exactly what happened. Is kind of what I went through, is that they were able to press the advantage early. Between, I believe, it was the Jace and the Graves, if I recall correctly, that had the majority of the kills. But they were able to press that early to mid-game advantage, and just apply that relentless pressure to try and whittle the enemy team down and try to get towers down as quickly as possible and continue to pressure them so that they could push their power spike and actually win the game as early as possible. So there you have it. So, one of the things that I do want to talk about, though, is that a lot of people across all ELOs and ratings in League of Legends, they get kind of stuck on a few different things that can happen that'll cause you to lose games when you shouldn't be losing games. So, one of those, actually, before I jump into that, there's this kind of ideology in sales that it's called your ABCs. So it's always be closing. And so I always find that funny because you can apply it to League of Legends. Always be trying to close the game out. Always be looking for those opportunities, no matter what your composition is. Look for the opportunities and look for your window to be able to try to close the game out as quickly as possible. Now, if we move on to some of the common pitfalls, there are a few different things that can occur that players are typically very susceptible of, that prevent them from winning easily winnable games. One of those is playing for KDA. So a lot of people get fixated on their stats. If you go and you look at op.gg or your player profile, people get all hyped up because of trying to maintain their KDA, just trying to farm kills as much as possible, or trying not to die or make an overly aggressive play, just for the sake of having a good KDA. It's a really irrelevant thing to do in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, if you want to play based on what is necessary to win. And that's kind of, the perception that you should take is that, as a tank, it doesn't matter. If you're able to frontline for your team and you die, but you end up acing the enemy team, that's okay. But a lot of people again get fixated on the they just want to farm kills, or they don't want to play to what their team's strength is. And then going forward from there, there's a lot of just getting caught up in fighting to just fight. That's why if you go and you look at statistically a lot of lower ranking games like iron or silver, gold, so on and so forth, there's a lot of these really extremely high kill games because people just get caught up in wanting to fight to fight. There's all these little skirmishes that are just irrelevant. The objectives aren't even, up, and maybe it's not even happening. And they just keep going at each other's throats back and forth and getting caught up in that entire concept when ultimately the kills and the deaths, or the kills don't even dictate who wins the game necessarily. Like, that's not the important factor. Yeah, the gold's cool, you get items, and you can build up and whatnot, but it's just not the important part of the game. And I think that a lot of people lose track of that in solo queue and in the game in general. And then missing the window on your primary win condition. So um, like we talked about, if let's say that you're a mid game team and you know and you recognize that you're a mid game team, so you're trying to win through the mid game, but unfortunately you didn't win through the mid game, it starts getting into late game. Well, a lot of people have that preconceived notion that, oh, well, we didn't win in mid game, we may as well just concede the fight. Anything can happen. Anything can happen in any game, if it's at the pro level, if it's at the amateur level, if it's just casually or in solo queue, whatever it may be. Anything can happen. And so I think that it's a matter of, instead of, oh, we missed our primary win condition, we're mid game team, we missed the mid game window, they're starting to scale into late, they're stronger. This is when you get innovative and you get sneaky and you look for picks and you try to catch the opponent off guard and do things that they're not expecting. And so just because you miss that win condition doesn't mean that the game is over. You just have to reevaluate and look at, okay, well, what's the pace of the game been? How can we position ourselves to still have an advantage? What's the strength of our team composition? And how can we look to actually still win this game? So don't get demoralized if you miss that primary win condition. Just look at a secondary one and start developing that. And then last, but certainly not least, is letting your ego get the best of you. I can't tell you guys how many players I've coached and how many teams I've coached that there's this arrogance that occurs whenever you're really stomping a team. And it happens in games of all skill levels. And you have a really crazy, let's say you're playing LeBlanc and you have, you're 10-0 in lane, right? Just imagine how strong you are relative to the rest of the team. And it's oh, I'm unkillable. Oh, I can one-shot everybody, and you're in the mid game and you're so far ahead. And so you let your ego kind of tell you that, hey, nobody can kill me. We can do whatever we want, blah, blah, blah. So instead of trying to press your advantage, trying to actually play for objectives, it kind of goes hand in hand with playing for KDA, to where you're just toying with your opponent. And so ultimately what happens is that you get overconfident, you get complacent, and you kind of just start playing around. And the enemy team really, one, could recognize that. Two, they really want to win. And they're still looking for, again, a secondary win condition like we just talked about. And they're able to capitalize on it, and they can actually still win the game. So you could end up being 10-1 and you lose the game because you just didn't try to play to your strengths and you didn't play according to trying to close a game out effectively. So what to work on? This is the final homework assignment, guys. As soon as Champion Select comes up, as soon as you actually get into the game, just start assessing, as the picks are coming out on both teams, just kind of start assessing each composition, right? Look at, where the strengths, where the weaknesses are, how you're going to have to dictate the pace of the game according to the position that you play, and where you're going to try to press your advantages. And then again, right, look at the progress of the game. It's not, a cookie cutter solution to where everything's just easily black and white and you can just, oh, if this happens, then this happens, and so on and so forth. But you have to adjust that win condition accordingly to it, right? If you're a mid-game and you guys win through the early game handedly and you can press your mid-game advantage and you can win, great. That went, all according to plan. But if not, look for that secondary win condition and how to adjust and be adaptable in game, and that'll help you win more games. And again, remember, just because you didn't win in that time window doesn't mean that you can't win. Period. It just means that you have to kind of recalculate things. So, as I mentioned to you guys in the beginning of the session, number one, if we have enough people in chat, I would love to get people in here. Love to be able to play an ARAM together. We'll see if we can do that. But beyond that, I do want to announce to you guys that we are going to be doing a Valorant camp. So if you or any of your friends actually play Valorant, if you got into the closed beta, we are going to be doing a Valorant camp starting May 11th. However, this Thursday, we're going to kind of be doing a preview and do an overview of kind of some cool tips and tricks, things of that nature, just to kind of get you guys interested and excited, talk about what we're going to be doing in the actual camp itself, give you a little bit of a preview. So if you're able to actually attend, please do. It'll be at the same time that this one starts at on Thursday, and then you'll get more details online as far as what the actual camp itself is going to be structured as. Of course, please do not forget to fill out the survey. This is the last chance. Try to fill out the survey and potentially win some free RP. But beyond that, if we have some questions in the chat, always happy to answer those. But always happy to help as best I can. And if we have some other people that are in the chat, if you want to post your name, I'll invite you to a game and we can go play an ARAM for fun. Well, I will. I guess, guys, we can go ahead and end things early on that note. Again, thank you guys for being a part of the camp. I hope that it was helpful and beneficial. Please fill out that survey. Give us feedback. Let us know how we can improve things. And we will catch you guys in the next camp. Remember, Valorant is on Thursday. Thanks, guys, and take care.